Hey guys, welcome back to the channel. My name is Brian from Kingdom Hearts Team Cross Nation, and today we are going over the DuckTales medals that we just got recently. I know quite a lot of you, or at least I hope quite a lot of you, have been looking forward to this. I know even just myself when looking at this stuff like this, these are just the type of medals that you're just like, ooh, we don't need this medal. But I'm really interested as to on how this medal is compared to others. It's just like one of those things. It's just one of those things. Like, you don't really need it if you have, you know, the OP medals like Kairi or Shion EX. But at the same time, it's like they're almost on par with them that you can't help be curious. It's just one of those things. I'm just as excited as I hope you guys are about going over these medals today. But yeah, anyways, without further ado, let's get started on the actual analysis. So for today's video, I'm actually just going to be covering the first three medals, the Launchpad McQuack, Huey Dewey Louie, and Webby Vanderquack medals, just because they're basically the same exact thing, except for the respective attributes, and I'll go into what they actually do. But I'm only going to be covering those three for today's video, just because it ends up being easier that way. In one of the later videos this week, I will be covering the Scrooge McDuck in addition to the DuckTales medals. But yeah, just like usual, I have all three updated on my site already at khuxnation.com, and if you wish to go for more in-depth analysis and ways to use these medals and such that I don't mention in this video, go ahead and feel free to check out the actual medal analysis articles that I have on my site. I go into all sorts of details about here, especially if you don't want to listen to me rant on and stuff. Feel free to go ahead and look at my actual article that I have. But anyways, let's get started on the actual medals. So Webby Vanderquack is a magic upright medal, tier 7 single target, has a max multiplier of 1.67, uses 2 gauges, has 1 hit, and this is what she does. For 3 attacks, she raises strength and magic strength by 7 tiers, lowers target's defense and magic defense by 7 tiers, and that's it. Huey Dewey Louie is the exact same thing, except he's a speed upright version, but he does the exact same ability, except he does it for speed strength instead of magic strength. And the same exact thing for Launchpad McQuack. He does it for power strength instead of magic or speed strength. And same thing with defense. Basically, they do the exact same thing, but for their respective attributes. And that's worth noting. Now, these medals were very interesting to talk about, to figure out how to best use them and stuff. Like, they're not medals that just straight off first glance you would realize on how to use. In my opinion, these are essentially like tier 7 versions of Illustrated Vivi. So starting off, I want to go over the scores real quick. So Webby Vanderquack has a score of 38.353. Huey Dewey Louie has 38.431. And Launchpad McQuack has a score of 38.471. And now, that might just sound like gibberish to you. So, let's go ahead and look at my spreadsheet that I always like to show off. I already took the liberty to highlight where they are in the spreadsheet. And I have them categorized by score already, from highest to lowest, from top to bottom. So, right now, Scrooge McDuck is at the highest right now. So, it's a little sneak peek preview as to, like, for whenever the medal analysis video comes out this week. But yeah, Scrooge McDuck is the highest. He actually beats the illustrated Kairi and Shion EX, and I'll go into why in the medal analysis video, but in terms of score, he beats those two medals. Now, I'm not saying that he's better than them or that he's worse than them either. I'm just simply saying he has a higher score. So please don't take that the wrong way. And like I said, I'll go into that in his own medal analysis video. But for now, let's focus on these three medals. They, in terms of score, they're essentially like here in the middle section of the tier 7 medals. Now, one thing I want to notice though when looking at this is that even though they appear to be in the middle of it, pretty much almost this entire upper section up here is filled with almost solely just EX medals. And then we have like, and it's also right next to Hercules B and Valor Genie. So it's like, when looking at that and taking that into account, the fact that they're basically right next door to those guys isn't that bad. It's kind of saying a lot too. Like, I mean, even if you're just looking at the scores, pretty much at this point, like they're pretty much near a score 40. And in my opinion, based off what I've seen in terms of like scores and stuff, any medal, any tier 7 medal I should say, that is near a score of 40 or over 40 obviously, is usually a really good tier 7 medal. Anything below a score of 30 for a tier 7 medal typically isn't that great, unless it's a purely damage medal. But at that point, that's not looking at scores anymore. But in terms of score, anything that's below a score 30 isn't necessarily like tier 7 worthy. One of these days, sometime soon, I'm planning to try and make a video going over my exact formula on how I actually do my scoring system, so that way you guys are better to understand how I do these things, and if necessary, you guys could even provide me some feedback on what you think are some ways for me to like do stuff scoring wise. But as for now, like, that's what I have. But yeah, in terms of score, they're in the middle. They're right next to some of the best medals currently at the moment, the EX medals for tier 7. And in my opinion, they have a very reasonable score. Like, it's high enough that I would expect, because they do a lot. Even though it's only for 3 attacks, even though it's only for 3 attacks, they still do a lot. It just feels justifiable. Like, I'm satisfied with their score. One thing I do want to point out though is that just like the other medals, like Kyrie and Shion EX, okay, is the fact that when I organize them by total max multiplier, so taking their guilt percentage and their max multiplier into account, they are just as low as some of the other bottom ones here. So let's look at them. So these 3 right here, okay, they have a total max multiplier of 5.01, or in other words, a max multiplier, so not taking their guilt percentage of account, of 1.67. And for those of you that have been watching, a total max multiplier of 1.67 is pretty much just as high as the total max max multipliers for tier 1 and 2 medals. It's very low, like it's almost non-existent. Like they in terms of multipliers, they do almost nothing. And I know some people have been curious about this, and have even asked me about it on Twitter. When it comes to like my article spreadsheets and stuff, I have listed as one of the best skills the attack boosts, max or just regular attack boost, whichever one. Attack boost skills, basically, as some of the best skills you can put on these medals. And I even had someone ask me why, as to was the case, because like I mentioned, they have trash multipliers. And the reasoning behind that is because of the fact that even though that they have like ridiculously low multipliers, like they're almost as bad as the Illustrated Kyrie and Illustrated Shion EX medals, like literally near the bottom. Even though they have like some of the lowest multipliers in the game, because of the fact that their abilities max out all of their stats and apply those stats before your damage gets actually gets dealt, the medal ends up still doing a lot of damage even with a low multiplier. It's because of that any attack boost skills are still viable for these type of medals. And the same exact logic applies for the Illustrated Kyrie and Illustrated Shion EX medals as well. Because of the fact they apply so much buffs and debuffs, even though they have low multipliers, they still do a lot of damage. And because of this, you can still put, if you really wanted to, I wouldn't really advise it, but I mean, like, you can if you want to. That's what I'm trying to say. They're an option. You can still put attack boost skills on these medals. In terms of me, my preferred skills when it comes to these type of medals, it kind of depends on what you have and what you're looking to do with them. So like, for example, let's say you don't have the Kyrie or Shion EX medals, okay? And you don't have Scrooge McDuck either. Then in that case, I would recommend having Second Chance on these medals, because of the fact that these will end up being like these staple medals for you that you want to try to use. And here's the thing too, a lot of people are kind of going on about the fact that they're single target, so they're terrible. That's not true. They're still really good. Even though they're single target, yes, granted, they won't be able to hit all enemies because of the fact they're a single target. But that doesn't mean that they're useless. Because when you think about it for a second, let's say you have one of these 3 medals in your first slot. Even though the medal will apply debuffs to only one enemy, you still have all of your buffs that you got from that medal. So you still have the +7 strength buff and +7 attribute buff, okay? And that still carries on to the rest of your medals for the next 2 attacks that get applied to. Because of this, you can still take advantage of it by having the other two medals be really good damaging AoE medals. And those alone should help be able to clear up the rest of the enemies that you're facing against. And even better, if you can make those high damage medals also really good debuff medals, say for example like the Illustrated Marluxia EX, the Riku Art EX, or the Illustrated Kingdom Hearts 2 Sora and Riku EX medal, like those for example, you could take advantage of those and still end up with the same exact type of stat buffs and stuff. Even though the medal is only single target, you can still use other AoE medals to essentially do the same thing. So they're not completely useless. By the way, in terms of traits, the traits you want to look out for when using these medals, my most preferred trait for these type of medals, you want to try to have the plus 40% raid boss damage trait or the extra attack trait. Now some of you might be asking why the extra attack trait, okay? They already max out all stats, there's no point having the extra attack trait. That's what I thought as well, okay? And you're not wrong, okay? Because I thought the same exact thing as well. But when I thought about it, kind of realized, well, even though the stats are already maxed out, and there's no point applying it again to the same enemy. If you have extra attack on the medal, you could still choose to use, so let's say for example you're fighting against 2 or 3 enemies instead of just 1. Because of the fact you have extra attack, you'll be able to apply those debuffs on another enemy as well. And that right there holds value. Granted, you're not going to get any more buffs, but it doesn't matter. You're still applying debuffs to another enemy. When I realized that, it made me think of that's probably worth noting and putting on as the best trait. Because I know that would probably be useful in some different types of situations and such. But those are my 2 preferred traits when it comes to these type of medals. So I kind of listed some of the benefits when it comes to these medals. In a way, I'm going to be kind of listing some of the restrictions of these medals as well, especially when it comes to setups. Because of the fact that these 3 medals only apply to their specific attribute, they only really truly work, you get the most value out of them from specific Keyblades. And that ends up being the Keyblades that are completely of just their own attribute. Like the 3 Witches Keyblade, the Counterpoint, and the Diamond Dust. These are essentially the best Keyblades to be used with, say, Webby Vanderquack. For Huey Dewey and Louie, it's the Lady Luck, Sleeping Lion, Missing Ink, and I'm pretty sure as you guessed, for Launchpad McQuack, it's Treasure Trove, Fenrir, and Darkgnaw. Those are the 3 medals for each of their attributes that are best to use them with. So that right there is kind of is a restriction on itself, but it's not really that bad of a restriction. I kind of briefly mentioned before, but one of the best traits on here that I prefer is the raid boss damage trait. This is because of the fact that these 3 medals are single target medals. That means that they are particularly more useful for obviously fighting against one enemy. That applies to raid bosses, of course, but that also applies to modes like Union Cross. Because in Union Cross you only ever fight one boss at the end of each round, so that becomes useful. That's something worth noting. For those of you that are using the Kairi or Shion EX medal in Union Cross, you might want to try giving these medals a try instead. The reason I say this is because of the fact that if you're trying to be that dude that's getting the MVP for most damage at the end of each round, these medals go off a whole lot quicker than Kairi or Shion EX does. Because I know whenever I'm in Union Cross, I'm always like, it takes me so long to just apply my buffs and debuffs from Kairi or Shion EX. And by the time I finish, some dude or 2 have already started applying damage, and now I'm gonna struggle to get that MVP. I tried testing these out, and they worked really well in Union Cross because they go off really quick, and I get all my buffs and debuffs that I need. And so that's something worth noting. Just a small little pro tip. So now in terms of uses, they're kind of very specific when it comes to uses. So the ways to use this medal entirely depends on whether or not you're using a friend medal. And the whole reason behind that is because of the fact that these 3 medals, they only work for 3 attacks. So with our current setup without friend medals, we have a total of 6 slots. However, once we introduce that friend medal into the equation, we in a way kind of have a 7th slot. When you think about it that way, if you only apply these medals to the 1st and 4th slot to cover all 6 slots, what ends up happening is you won't have those buffs or debuffs anymore when you actually get to your friend medal. And so when it comes to friend medals, okay, if you're not using a friend medal, so just like I mentioned before, you want to have these medals in the 1st and 4th slot. I forgot to mention before, but for these medals, in order to make these strategies work, you need 2 copies of each medal to make it work. Especially if you don't have Kyrie or Shioni X or Scrooge McDuck. You want to try to get at least 2 copies of each one. Otherwise, you're going to be struggling. But yeah, without friend medals, you want to have a copy of whatever attribute you're doing it on. So let's say Webby Vanderquack, for example, because I have it here on my screen. You want to have a copy in your 1st slot and a copy in your 4th slot. For those of you that don't realize, any medal that says does blah 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 for X account attacks, those X account attacks, it's including its own attack. So just using its own attack already used up one of those 3 attacks, so you only have 2 attacks left to benefit from the buffs and debuffs that these medals apply. So that's why it goes in the 1st and 4th slot, because by the time you get to the 4th slot, the buffs and debuffs from the 1st slot are gone, so you need the 4th slot to apply the buffs and debuffs again to be able to have those carry on to your 5th and 6th slot. Now, the same thing kind of applies to if you are using a friend medal, just a slight change. So instead of having the medals in the 1st and 4th slot, you're going to actually end up having it in the 2nd and 5th slot instead. And what you want to do this time, and this is kind of where it gets like specific, because of the fact you're having your 1st buffer medal in your 2nd slot instead this time, you need your 1st slot to be using a SP gauge refilling medal. And so like the illustrated Kingdom Hearts 2 Kyrie, or Tyree as some of you call it. I don't understand why. To me that's dumb, but whatever. You have the Kyrie, the Kingdom Hearts 2 Kyrie in your 1st slot, okay? So that way you can refill your gauges. And the whole reason behind this is because of the fact you have your friend medal now, you're consuming a whole lot more gauges than you probably need. So having that 1st slot be your SP gauge refilling slot is important. As well, because of the fact your 1st slot is not gonna have any of the buffs or debuffs anyways, you might as well have that 1st slot be an SP gauge refilling medal to at least get the most use out of that 1st slot. By doing this, you still achieve the same thing. You're able to refill your gauges. You're able to max out your buffs and debuffs for all of your slots, including your friend slot, because by having one of the copies in the 5th slot, it's also covering the 6th and 7th slot for you. So you'll most likely end up using that last method, so with a friend medal, particularly for raid bosses, because of the fact you do use friend medals for raid bosses. So that's something worth noting. But for when it comes to Union Cross and stuff like that, you'll probably end up using the 1st method without a friend medal instead. And just a quick note, because of the fact that you don't have an SP gauge refilling medal for the 1st strategy, you want to keep track of your SP usage. Even though they use low amounts of SP gauges already, it kind of depends on what medals that you're using for the other slots. So it's just something to keep in mind. But anyways, that's it for today, guys. That was a bit of a longer medal analysis than what I usually do. It kind of just had to tie in the fact that these medals had kind of more specific, advanced strategies and setups and are like necessary to apply them properly than most medals. But I found it amusing and worth mentioning. But if you enjoyed the episode, please leave a like and subscribe. Feel free to let me know your comments in the comment section below as well. I always read your guys' comments, even if I don't always get to respond. So I appreciate any feedback that you guys have, especially if you have any suggestions for stuff that I can do. But yeah, if you enjoyed the episode, please leave a like and subscribe. And hit that bell button. It's the best way to know when I upload a new video. I try to upload every day at 8 o'clock when I can. I'm not always able to upload every day or at that time, so hitting that bell button is the best way to know when I actually upload a video. But yeah, that's it for today, guys. I hope you enjoyed the video. Please look out for the rest of the medal analysis videos for the rest of the week. But other than that, I will see you guys in the next video. Peace.